scripture passage that many of us know. Some of us have been on the walk to Emmaus, but it's more than that. It's a story that's so deep in our faith. And a couple of things that I've noticed about this story that as I was reading it, I would like to point out to you is, first of all, who in the world is Cleopas? I mean, all of a sudden we're reading the scriptures, right? I mean, we read about the 12 disciples in Matthew, and he names them all, right? There's no Cleopas. And then all of a sudden, the afternoon of Easter, Jesus is risen, and here's Cleopas mentioned in the Bible, walking home, going back, we think home at least to Emmaus anyway, going on his way to Emmaus, and he's got a companion with him. Well, who in the world is this companion, and who is Cleopas? Well, very interesting. Cleopas is really only known in the Bible because of his wife, Mary. And where was Mary in the Bible? She's not even mentioned, but she's there at the tomb. There are 3 Marys at the tomb and a Salome. There are 4 women there at the tomb preparing Jesus' body. One of them is Mary, the mother of Jesus, of course. We know all about her. Well, not really. We just know who she is. And then there's Mary Magdalene, right? But then there's this other Mary, Cleopas' wife. Isn't that cool? 3 Marys. I have a family. If you read my article this week in my Look from Brooke, I have a family with 5 Marys. And we have the terrible time naming them all. There's one Mary, my mom's sister, we just call Mary. And then my dad has 2 Marys. I have 2 aunts. And so one is Aunt Mary Jane, and the other one is Aunt Mary Eileen. And then we have 2 more yet on my mom's side, and they don't even get a middle name. They're just Fred's Mary. Way to go there, not the greatest, Fred's Mary. And then the other one is, what's the other one? Adolph's Mary, if you can believe that. There's an Adolph's Mary. So interesting how we name people, right? Or, if you look at the Bible, well, sometimes we don't name people at all. We don't even name this Mary who's at the tomb, Cleopas' wife. But more, Cleopas should be named Mary's husband. That's really the role there. But anyway, what we see on the walk to Emmaus, and I never thought of it this way, but most scholars believe now, it was Cleopas and Mary, this couple walking to Emmaus, this married couple. And this kind of just blows my mind a little bit, because when we think about Jesus calling the disciples, there on the lake shore, and Jesus seems to be calling just males, well, we know that's not true, right? He is calling families. They don't just leave their family and go off. Family comes along. It's a family thing. They follow along. And so we have Cleopas and Mary, this couple walking away from Jerusalem on Easter afternoon, and they aren't too excited, to be honest with you. My flower's gone. I was going to bring that flower out, the droopy flower, because that's what they looked like. That is what they felt like. It wasn't just that Jesus had died. Now it was almost like someone had stole his body. They didn't believe the resurrection yet. They heard all that rumor from some of the women, but it wasn't happening in their hearts, right? And so they were struggling with all this. And when someone dies, it's hard enough when someone we love dies, but this wasn't just someone they loved. This was someone who had called them into a whole new life, a whole new way of believing, a whole new way of walking in this world. And so when Jesus dies, that dies with them. They had been living a whole new life for 3 years, and now Jesus is crucified. That belief, that whole understanding is gone. And so they're kind of just going back to their old way, the way life is, not the way life could be. Kind of feels like living in the pandemic, doesn't it? The way life is, not the way life could be this way, right? I was thinking about this a little bit, and I was thinking of the disciples. I don't think when they were called by Jesus, the men and women that were called, I don't think they probably had a very good place in this world. In fact, my guess is the world had told them they didn't add up, that they didn't have any great careers, that they didn't have a social spot in this world. They were the 99% that we don't see in this world. They were the invisibles of this world. And what they loved about Jesus was that he listened to them. He really honestly heard them, and he called them. He believed in them. I don't know if you've ever had someone who did that. When I was in college, I had a drama professor, Daryl Patton, and I was not that good at drama. I think I got better, but I was Charlie Brown in the first play that I was in, singing that musical. And I just couldn't get out of my skin, I just was always Brooke McBride, and I couldn't seem to get out of my skin. But one rehearsal, I don't know what happened. I just let go, and I decided to be Charlie Brown. And let me tell you, Daryl just laughed his biggest laugh ever, this authentic, amazing laugh. And it was almost like he knighted me that day, in that practice. He knighted me as, Brooke, you're a thespian, man. You are into this. You can do this acting thing. And it changed my life. He anointed me. He believed in me. He listened to me. He got me. And that's the way Jesus saw those women. And that's the way Jesus saw those fishermen. He got them. And they loved that. I mean, they were eating it up for 3 years. But then life happened, right? The Mack truck came by and just wiped Jesus out, crucified him. And so there they were. Nobody listening anymore. They believed that God was in this human being, and in this human being only. They really made Jesus an idol. And Jesus was more than that, right? Jesus was more than the historical Jesus. There was more to that. I've been reading a book called The Four Winds. Anybody heard of it? Kristen Hanna, great book. She's a great writer. She's from Bainbridge Island, so you've got to read her, Pacific Northwest author. But she writes this book, she wrote it during the pandemic, called The Four Winds. And in this book, there's this family who lives in the Texas Panhandle during the 1930s. And some of our history, 1930s Panhandle dust storm, right? The Deep Depression. And they're living on this farm there. And they've carved out their life. She has, with her husband, have carved out this life on their God. And if you know farmers, most farmers have two gods. They have a God Almighty, but sometimes they have a God called the land, this land. And that was their God, the land. The land would provide. If we bought this land and produced on this land, we could make this land be our ground of being for the rest of our lives. And then the dirty 30 hit. The depression, the droughts, the dust storms came rolling in, and they could not make it on that land. And so they had to leave. They had to leave their God, that land, and go to California to start a new life. And you watch and you hear just how hard this is for them. How difficult it was for this woman to take her 2 children, there was no husband at that time, and take them by herself, traveling by herself, just to start a new life. Reminds me a little bit of the Afghanistan families that we know. They're leaving everything, all that they have. They're, in a sense, their understanding of God, and coming to a new place. One of the things she writes, and by the way, the other thing about this woman, I wouldn't have wanted to live in the 1920s and 30s if I was a woman, but she was a tall woman. And she wasn't beautiful, or at least they didn't think she was beautiful. And so she, in 1920s, 1930s, you live on a farm. What is a woman supposed to do? Get married. I mean, that's your job. Get married, have kids. And no one would date her. So 25, she wasn't married. She really was not seen as someone who had any purpose in her life. She wasn't fulfilling her purpose. And her parents told her that at every turn, that she just didn't add up. I think sometimes she felt like the disciples. But here's what she writes. There was a pain that came from constant disapproval, a sense of having lost something unknown, unnamed. Elsa had survived it by being quiet, by not demanding or seeking attention, by accepting that she was loved but unliked. Heartache had been a part of her life so long that it had become as familiar as the color of her hair or the slight curve in her spine. Sometimes it was the lens through which she viewed her world. And sometimes it was the blindfold she wore so she didn't see. But it was always there. That, my friends, is how I think the disciples felt before they met Jesus, before Jesus heard them, before they felt that love. They felt unlovable. And they looked through life through that unlovable lens. But Jesus changed that. Jesus loved that distorted core belief out of them. Jesus taught them that they were first and foremost loved by God. That love wasn't something they had to earn, but instead it was a watermark. You know what a watermark is on a piece of paper, right? You cannot take that watermark out of that paper. They were judged, yes, judged forever, loved. That was their judgment. And for some reason, that message lived and loved into them in Jesus, started to take root. I hope it's taking root in your life. Started to grow, to take a seed. But there was a fundamental flaw in how the early disciples perceived the message from Jesus. The historical Jesus, the pre-Easter Jesus, we might say, if we read the Gospels carefully. Jesus, the historical Jesus, was very uncomfortable with the way the disciples worshiped him. They did not like it. Jesus did not. Jesus always made it a point to point beyond himself. Jesus didn't point to himself. He was always pointing to something greater, something greater. Like the moon points to the sun, Jesus pointed always higher to God, always deeper, something deeper. Start believing in something more, something stronger, a love that's underneath it all. Jesus was the messenger of God, not the message. His life, death, and resurrection pointed to something greater yet than he was. And you can see this in some of the scripture passages. Read John 20:17, one of our resurrection stories, for instance. Mary finally recognizes the risen Christ in the garden. Jesus says his name. Will, you mentioned that this morning. And she runs to him and embraces him. But she holds on to him too tight, She won't let go. And Jesus says, don't cling to me, for I have yet ascended to the Father. But go to the brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Do you see what's happening here? Mary's trying to hold on to an idol, to something that's gone in a way. She not only experienced God through Jesus, but Jesus is saying, listen, no. Open your eyes, open your heart. Don't just hug me. I'm just the pointer. I'm the symbol. God's love is much more than me. God's love is in all things and just right around the corner. The historical Jesus wasn't what was ultimately the most important. It was the love that was and is embodied when we learn to love like Jesus, when we learn to listen like Jesus, when we learn to notice the 99% who think they are invisible in this world. You might be one of them today. Maybe the beginning of following Jesus is to notice yourself and how you're hiding all of who you are from the world because you're afraid of that world might take it away. There's a quote that she shares in the book, and it's just a beautiful quote about love. It reminds me of my mother. Love is what remains when everything else is gone. This is what I should have told my children when we left Texas, what I will tell them tonight. Not that they will understand yet. How could they? I'm 40 years old, and I just learned this fundamental truth myself. Love, in the best of times, is a dream. In the worst of times, it's a salvation. I am in love. There it is. I've written it down. Soon I will say it out loud to him. I am in love. As crazy and ridiculous and implausible as it sounds, I am in love, and I am loved in return. And this love gives me courage, the courage I need today. The four winds have blown us here, people from across the country to the very edge of this great land, and now at last we make a stand, fight for what we know to be right. We fight for our American dream, that it will be possible again. Jack says that I'm a warrior, and while I don't believe it, I know this. A warrior believes in an end she can't see, fights for it anyway. A warrior never gives up. A warrior fights for those who are weaker than herself. It sounds to me like motherhood. I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes I feel a lot like that first flower these days. I feel like, I don't know, I've given up a little bit on the dream. What we're really called to be in this world. I look at America and I wonder what it stands for right now. And yet, I still have that warrior in me that Jesus wakes up every once at 2 a.m. You know, that we're called to be something better. That there is something better beyond us that we can make this world into. And we don't have to be the President of the United States to do it. We can be fishermen. We can be spouses. We can be teachers. We can be doctors. We can be lawyers. We can be retired. We can be Brooke McBride, for crying out loud. We can truly change this world. We can truly love in a deeper way. I don't know about you, but Bud Light, I'm starting to think I might have a drink of that sometime. Right? Maybe that's something we ought to be doing as a symbol of embracing the trans community that is so kicked around in this world today. And I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like I should be going to a Jewish synagogue sometime soon. And not just worshiping with them, but standing with them when they get picked on and kicked around. And I don't know about you, But one of the reasons I love being a reconciling church is sometimes reconciling churches get it, and sometimes they get it from the world. We have the Lutheran Church in Kirkland that just received some terrorist comments on their website, and there were flyers put on their cars last week because they chose to love all people. And the Edmonds United Methodist Church, a sister church to us as well, received those kind of comments. We're making a difference by standing with the people we stand. We can be this. And I want to encourage you today. Think about Jesus' love. Think about it. Think about how Jesus cares and listens to you. And can't we at least have the dignity to listen and try to understand someone we don't understand first before we go about judging them? Jesus did it on that walk to Emmaus, and we can do it on our walk. And all the people said,